Okay, this meeting is now live on YouTube.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to everyone who is virtually joining this meeting and anyone who's observing it. This is the December meeting of the West Midlands Police Joint Audit Committee, and we are once again having to meet virtually because of the current issues with the pandemic. I hope that everyone has been able to make the adjustments, and thanks to all who are here. We do have apologies from Inspector Rachel Byrne-Jones and from two of our members, Bhupinder Gokal and Charmaine Burton. Bhupinder is at a funeral and Charmaine actually has COVID, I understand. So we wish her a speedy recovery and hope that we will be able to see her at our training session in January. Does anyone have any declaration of interest in any item on the agenda that they need to make?
No.
No, shaking heads. Thank you very much. So we have the minutes from the previous meeting held in September. Is everyone content that they are an accurate record of our proceedings? Yes, Vanessa?
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
Good morning. I am not shown as listed on the attendees, and I am in the minutes referenced a few times. I'm pretty sure I was there.
You were there.
So, yes.
You were there, but you're not listed. Apologies for that. I'd missed that as I was reading it through. So we'll add you in.
Thank you.
Any other amendment? So other than that, can we agree them as an accurate record?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. There says that there are no matters arising. Just to update people, because we did have a discussion on how we would move on issues of risk. We are going to be having a training session for members. That this was in relation to our input into thinking about risk appetite. So there's a session in January, which all the members of the committee will be attending, and then we may, after that, decide that we need to come back to that to make take some formal view. I have nothing else though. Does anybody else have any thing they want to raise as a matter arising that's not on the agenda? No. Okay, so at item 5 then we're on to the risk management update, and this will include for the first time the new risk register from the Commissioner's Office, taking into account the new policing plan. But should we deal with the force register first? Now, who wants to lead off on this?
I'll be leading, Chair.
Yes.
Morning, can you hear me?
Morning, yes.
Okay.
Go on then, Monica.
So since the last quarterly review, we've had one addition to the corporate risk register and one risk has been closed, and I'll get to those as we go through the paper. So the risk profile for the corporate risk register, most of the risks have stayed stable, have remained the same, with a slight reduction in 2 of the risks, and those are mainly around the police cadet leaders, safeguarding risk. The mandatory training compliance has increased from 60 to 81, and there has been now put in place that cadet leaders their involvement will be paused pending completion of the training workshop. The reason during the summer why it was at 60% is that we did have new leaders that joined during the year. So as we've progressed and mitigated this risk, that it has increased the numbers that are complying with the mandatory training. However, because of staff turnover, it may not always reach 100%. So we may reach 90%, people may leave, people may join. So as they join, the percentage will change. There'll be movement. There has been a slight reduction in the uplift program element of the risk, and there's been the application program has been temporarily paused until the spring, so Q1 2022-23. So, however, there does remain a inherent risk around the student recruitment program. So over the past quarter, COVID it has had an impact on risk, the profile, over the past, say, 2 years now, and it wasn't having quite a negative impact over the past, say, 2 months. But obviously, we've seen with increased infection rates and increased restrictions, this may change the profile of the risks over, and it may have an impact on a number of the corporate risks. So at the moment, we are doing an analysis and review of what the potential impact could be around stricter restrictions on all the particular risks, because obviously some of these risks have been impacted, and the reason why they're critical and high, COVID has had an impact, for example, around training and in-person training. So COVID has had an impact around that, and we may see these risks be negatively impacted by these stricter restrictions and the ongoing infection rates in the country. So there's one risk that's been closed, and that's around the resourcing mutual aid risk around the COP26. The conference is now finished, and so the risk around this has now closed, and it's now being managed as a learning. So learning is going to be used. They're going to use the learning process to see what they could have, lessons that can be learned around the resourcing, and taking it forward to obviously the Commonwealth Games, because that still remains a risk on the corporate risk register. And we've added a new risk, and that's around probation, data sharing between probation service and a disclosure, and that's around the information request made by the portfolio, by the parole board. And we've assessed it as critical because we need to develop processes and find an IT solution around mitigating this and reducing the risk of ICO fines and GDPR breaches, and ensuring that staff are well aware of the disclosures that are meant to be made, and having a centralized process around how the information is disclosed and who discloses it, and as the information comes into the force and it's disclosed to the parole board adequately. There've been some changes to the process over the past quarter, but not as many as the last time that we reported. But for the next quarter, what we're planning to do is to develop action plans, because obviously, as you can see from the risk register, the risk profile has remained stable, and there hasn't been much movement in the risk scores and mitigation. So it's to start working with risk owners to put actions in place and to effectively review their controls that they put in place and assess them. So it's looking at the controls, seeing if they're effective, and putting in action plans to try and mitigate these risks down. And that will be coinciding with reviewing the risk appetite statement as well, because I think there also needs to be that guidance provided as to why we need to mitigate these risks down, and why there needs to be movement in these risks, because most of the risks will probably need to meet their appetite. So that's a guidance piece and awareness piece that we'll be doing in the next quarter with the risk owners.
Okay, good, thank you. I think the committee will be pleased to hear your first comment that cadet leaders, where they're still awaiting training, will be paused from actually doing the leading. I think that's very helpful. So are there comments or questions from other members? Yes, Richard.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the paper, Veronica. It's helpful. I've got kind of a couple of questions on training, really. One was that paragraph 2.4. And just, I take note of your point about you probably never, in actuality, reach 100%, and 90% is probably a figure to kind of have in mind. Just, do you have a sense of when we might get to a point where we say, we've completed training within a reasonable percentage? Is there an expected or planned kind of date in mind with that?
So the figure that I've provided is as of November, so last month. And so an up-to-date figure, I can obtain an up-to-date figure and provide that to yourselves next month if required. But regarding a particular date as to when we're hoping to, so obviously for this risk to come off the risk register and for it to be managed as business as usual, and obviously for this not to actually be quite an inherent risk for us, that information isn't available, but I can get that information and get an indicative date as to when they hope for that to be something that they, that we get a certain percentage and it's no longer something that's impacting
I mean,
the organisation as it is.
Thank you. I mean, if it's, say, for the sake of argument, it stayed at 81%, what's the effect of that upon the organisation in terms of its operational impact?
At 81%, I mean, it depends on the level of cadet leaders. So it's, if we only had 81% and obviously the 19%, what impact would it have on the cadet service itself? So would it mean we'd have to reduce the number of intakes we have, or reduce the service that's, you know, the actual cadet program? So that's something I'd have to get back to you on, but that's obviously with less leaders in place, that will reduce the offering that we can provide operationally for the program.
Okay, just thank you. And then just on kind of the wider issue of training, that CRR 16 reference in the register, and there's one on CRR 18 as well. Is training just delivered in person? Because that's what I took away from it. And are we limiting ourselves by having that as the primary or sole route? Because we may be in and out of restrictions or lockdowns for some time to come. So that's obviously going to have a downward pressure on the kind of throughput of people if that's our sole route. So I just wondered, are we kind of painting ourselves into a corner here if we're just relying on in-person training?
So with the training, there has been a backlog caused by COVID and cancellations due to various reasons. So that can be staff absences or just cancellations for different reasons. Training, in most cases, the training is delivered in person and so obviously this has had an impact. As I mentioned previously, that we'll be doing a review to see if there are other ways to deliver certain types of training, because obviously there's certain types of training for particular skills that will probably need to be in person, but that is something that can be looked at. But I think why there's probably been the numbers and the issues with training is the backlog that was caused with previous restrictions and trying to get those people that were probably booked last year or earlier in the year when there was a full lockdown onto those courses as we get new people. But I can get back to the particular portfolio and find out if there is something, whether they can provide an online offering or a virtual offering.
Thanks, Frank. It'd be helpful to know kind of if we're kind of making inroads into that backlog as well. Are we kind of living with the backlog, you know, as a long-term thing, or are we kind of reducing it as well?
Okay.
Chair, I've got a number of other questions, but I'm conscious other people might want to come into this point.
Yes, and I can't because we're now in the because we're now in a view for those watching, as it were. I can't see whether other hands have gone up wanting to come in on this point. So can anybody? Is there anybody wanting to come in on this point?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Kath.
Just a couple of questions. Firstly, there's a number of new items that have appeared on the risk register. Just some help in understanding, is that because there's a new regime and a new set of eyes looking at these processes, or is it something that has developed because there's an issue with those particular areas? So that's the first question. The second is about the data for the parole board. There must have been a system in place previously to share information with the parole board. What's changed that's brought this now onto the risk register? And then the final question, there's a comment in there on recruitment, which indicates that student officers might be failing their university their university models. In which case, some understanding about how that's come about, because in previous meetings there's been a really rigid structure about providing support and help. So just some understanding of what the issues are around that, if that's possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So for the first question, that's really, as you mentioned, that is around the new process that we have. So obviously people now approaching strategy and direction, and we're going through the process and going through the governance, and that's how the new risks are being added. So for this particular quarter, there's been one addition. I know there were about 4 last time, and that's simply because the process is now being embedded across the force, and people are approaching and things are being escalated upwards, and that's with the attendance of going to governance boards and assessing the risks. So that's response to the first question, and I think it links to the second question again. It's now that there's a process in place around risk management, that's now been highlighted. So it was an issue previously, and it's now been highlighted to me to add that on. But some of these risks are temporary, so we may see risks reported at this particular committee meeting, and they may be on for 2 particular quarterly cycles, but they may come off. So most of these risks, so the parole board, it's been identified, it's been highlighted, and so mitigations will be put in place, and hopefully with the action plan process, this will be mitigated down, and temporarily, it's been put onto the risk register this time for this particular reporting cycle, but maybe it's come off for the next cycle, because obviously it's now recognised, and there's now more oversight and scrutiny around some of these new risks.
And that's describing a dynamic process, which is what we want to see. So yeah, thank you for that explanation, Veronica. And I'll let you get on to the third.
And the third one around recruitment, I would have to get back to you with more information on that, because we have had a cohort of student officers who have now graduated, and there is support that's been, it's been highlighted. We're aware, the portfolio is aware of this particular risk, and additional support measures are being put in place, but I can get back to you with the specifics around your question.
That's great, Veronica. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Back to Richard then.
Thanks, Chair. Veronica, some of these are just quick points of clarification, hopefully. 2.6, which is the reference in the risk register CRR 20, you talk about the IT system has been finalised, and I didn't quite know what that meant. Did it mean it had been implemented, or a product had been selected, or a vendor had been chosen? So that hopefully that's quite a quick one to answer.
So I'll just provide some clarity around that, because it's probably how it's reading. So the Probation Service and the National Freedom of Information team are close to finalising an information sharing agreement, which will control some of the issues better. So the plans for mitigation around this, an IT solution is under consideration. So it's probably just the way it's been phrased within the risk register, but an IT solution is under consideration at the moment. So that's a response to that.
So in terms of the mitigation, then we've not really, the mitigation hasn't changed. It's still that risk exposure hasn't moved much, I guess.
So the gross risk on the full risk register, the gross risk and the net risk remains the same.
Okay, so thank you. That's helpful. Just an observation on 211 on your paper. There's a column that talks about risks and consequences in that table, and I couldn't see any consequences. So it's just an observation. I think it would be helpful to know, to develop that content of that column, to talk about the impact and effect if a risk were realised, because it seems to sort of stop short in my reading of it.
I think that's a risk. I think that's for the PCC.
It's the PCC, yeah. Okay, so we'll hold that one over and ask Mark to comment on that. Was that it, Richard? Just one more.
217. I don't know what that sentence means again. It's the reference to the current position regarding performance indicators, and I don't know whether we're saying, are they not working? Are they a work in progress, or is it something else?
That also is on the OPCC, isn't it? So so we'll ask Mark to pick that up as well. Okay, it's the complication of having a joint committee, isn't it? And two bits to every paper. Okay, so you're done. Okay. Did anyone else want to come in? I don't think so. So thank you very much, Veronica. And we can then move to Mark. and he can perhaps just give us a feel for how far this is still a document in preparation, because clearly the policing plan has only actually been published a matter of weeks, and all of the risks may not emerge immediately. But if you can give us an overview, Mark, and then perhaps if you would then in your introduction pick up those two questions that Richard has asked.
Yes, Chair, no problem. So yeah, you're right. So this is work in progress, but I think it does provide a structure to understand where we're going in terms of risk management, and not wishing to repeat the report itself. The way we're going to manage the risks of the OPCC is in two particular sections, really, around the functions of the PCC, which are laid down in statute, and what are the risks around delivering those particular functions. And then we're going to look at obviously the delivering the police and crime plan, and there is a bit of overlap, and you probably pick that up yourself from looking at the report, between delivering the police and crime plan and the functions of the PCC. So what we've done is we've scored against the particular functions, as you can see in the report, and then what we've done in terms of a methodology for the police and crime plan, because as you know, when we talked about the police and crime plan at the previous meeting, it's a very detailed plan. And there's a lot of actions in there which have been taken through, which are documented in a plan itself in terms of delivery. Apologies for saying the word plan so many times. But each of those actions have been scored, have been RAG rated by the senior management team within the OPCC. And what we've done is we've themed those particular red scores to show the sort of general themes that's being picked up through those red scores. And what we will do is obviously bring in a new category in terms of complete as well. So it'll be RAG rated, and we'll also bring in another category if something is complete. But the very nature of some of the actions they are ongoing. And it will obviously be helpful at our training session in January if I go through the delivery plan review to see the detail behind it. So that's it in terms of the risk register. We'll obviously bring in things around sort of tracking scores, direction of travel, bringing in those features. So if I can just sort of talk about some sort of general things in terms of where we are in terms of the mitigations and the risks themselves. Clearly, it is early days, and we are working at those actions. So some of those actions will come down into amber and green over the time, and some will be completed. There's some general themes that affect a number of areas, things like resources. You'll be aware of the Violence Reduction Unit is specifically grant funded, and we rely on an annual allocation, and we don't know what that is yet, and we probably won't know that into the new calendar year, probably late January, early February. So that is a risk around sort of commissioning activity. So we're constantly playing sort of a stop-go mentality around some of these commissioned areas, which is a key part of the commissioner's business, not just in the VRU, but also in the victims area, and also in other sort of general commissioning services as well. So that's something that we find frustrating. That is a risk to our business in terms of continuity and carrying on. Obviously, the overall level of resources to public sector organisations, particularly police, is a concern as well. The organisation faces a number of cost pressures, including inflation, potential pay awards, and things of that nature, which means that the overall resources to deliver the police and crime plan and sort of deliver the police services obviously is something that of a concern. Other sort of general areas as well is performance. There's two areas to that. One being the development of some of the performance indicators in the police and crime plan is still work in progress, and also the performance of the force in certain areas is a concern, and it's something I will bring to the training session in January, the suite of performance indicators and where we are in terms of developing those. So just picking up Richard's particular points, I think there was one around consequences of risk. Yeah, I accept that can be developed further. I think it's quite stark. I think some of the consequences of the risk. Obviously, the police and crime plan won't be delivered. The potentially the effectiveness and efficiency of the force won't be maintained or might go worse. Those are the sort of consequences, I think, at the pretty start. And I think I picked up the performance point, Richard, really making the intro around the fact that they're in development and some of the areas are a concern from the performance point of view as well. So that's my introduction. If anybody's got any questions.
No, thank you. That's helpful, Mark. Thank you.
I mean, I do think that it's actually helpful that that at the outset there is a section on risks about the functions of the PCC, because it sort of sets the context. And the previous risk register, I always felt it slightly odd that the risk, the headline risk, was about compromising the West Midlands road network. Now, one understood why there was a risk around it, but any outside observer coming to look might have scratched their head and thought, well, why is that the first risk that you think of in terms of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner? So I think this is helpful as sort of setting it in its context of what the role of the OPCC is. So thank you for that.
Chair, just got another point.
Yes.
Sorry, Chair, let's make another point. So I missed it in my introduction. Another key thing for us is partnerships.
Yes.
So we are relying on sort of public sector partners and other partners to deliver the police and crime plan. So that's a key risk for us, which comes out in the theme risks.
Yes. So is there anyone else wanting to come in? I'm afraid I can't see you. So putting the hand up symbol isn't going to be working. You're going to need to speak out.
Yeah, so Chair, Richard again.
Yes.
On CRR 14, we the alarms management, that came up at the last audit committee meeting as a concern, and appears to be unresolved still. And I just wondered, can we get a sense of progress on that one since we last met?
Chair, I think that's the force risk register.
Yes, it's in the force one.
Sorry, I'm thinking about it. Sorry.
We'll go back to Veronica. I'm assuming she's still in the meeting because I can't see that. But so anything else for Mark? Nobody's coming in. So Veronica, can you pick that one up about the alarms on properties?
Okay.
Has there been any progress?
So for this particular risk, there hasn't been a significant amount of progress. So the only difference is ownership of this risk has moved to a new portfolio area within the force. And I think the last time it was still being moved from a different geographical area, it's now been moved to the central C3 building. I think the main issue around this risk is that the receiver is old and uses an analog system, and the parts, if for a breakdown or if it requires repair, are not available. So should the system fail, it would not have a catastrophic impact on the force, but it would be cumbersome to deal with. So it's just really around, I think the main thing around this risk, and we'll be looking at in the next quarter or next 6 months, will be a decision does need to be made around how to effectively manage and treat the risk, and could possibly involve investment into a more up-to-date digital system. So that's really what the main updates around that is. Just a decision does need to be made. A number of options have been put forward, so a decision just needs to be made around those particular options.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I mean, I think the concern for the committee on this, as a number of others, is just it doesn't appear to show sufficient forward thinking.
Yeah.
And the fact that responsibility shifts ought not to interfere with the forward thinking that says, not at the point at which it's a problem, but a year, 2 years before that, here's something that's becoming obsolete. We know we can't get spares for it. We must have a solution before it becomes a problem. And I think that's the concern from the committee. We're wanting to see better forward planning and recognition of risks further back down the line. so that you're never at the point where you've got a critical problem.
Yeah, and I think as I've mentioned, for the next quarter, what we'll be concentrating on is putting those action plans into implementing those action plans, or putting them into processing those action plans, so that there may not be a change in the particular scores, but the profile will be different for each individual.
Okay, thank you, Veronica. Okay, anybody else on anything to do with the risk register reports? If not, then thank you, Mark and Veronica, for your comments on those. We'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the update on Her Majesty's Inspectorate's reports. Harry, I think you are presenting this.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Rachel isn't available this week, unfortunately. So the HMIC FRS paper is a bit longer than usual because we've included the outcome of the appeal inspection, which members will be aware we've been planning for this year, and we had the results come in October, November time. So we've tried to provide an outline of the outcomes from that inspection, but also provided a link to the full document should members want to read that. And I'm sure most of you either have or had seen it when it came out, or have subsequently looked at it. So I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the particular grading areas in the report. And then we have our usual update about upcoming thematic inspections and published reports. So I'll happily take questions on the first section, which is about the appeal inspection, if there are any.
Okay, members? Clearly, the inspector has picked up on one or two issues which had been the subject of internal audit reports. So I'd be interested to know what's the relationship between the inspector. Are internal audit reports something that are provided to the inspectorate before they come and do appeal report? If we've looked at that area, or would we expect them to routinely be reading all our internal audit reports? What's the how does the one feed into the other?
I don't think there's a sort of specific request, if you like, for to see internal audit reports habitually, but I believe that if there's a thematic inspection covering an area where there is an up-to-date internal audit position, then we're able to provide that. Similarly, I think with appeal, we'd be cognizant of the areas that the inspectorate would be looking at, and both in terms of the strategic briefing that we provide them up front, would be highlighting any assurance activities that have been going on in the organisation, as well as providing the substance of that information. I mean, especially where it's already publicly available. But I don't know if Lynn, you want to come in on that point as well.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Harry. I think Harry's right there. I think occasionally where we've undertaken an audit and HMIC FRS are aware of that, they will request the report. But also on occasions they will meet with the auditor that's undertaken the report to go through the findings. And I know that's happened in a couple of areas, such as missing and RASO recently. And we do tend to have some interaction with the HMIC FRS liaison lead throughout the year on various items that we've got in the audit plan. So those links are definitely developing, and they do have access to our findings. If they need them, they can always be cited on them. But that relationship is one that we're continuing to build.
Okay, thank you. So I wonder if perhaps I can ask the Deputy Chief Constable, Vanessa, do the findings of the inspectorate coincide with where the force senior team thought they were? Is it reflecting the Chief Constable's and your own view of where effort and input was needed?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, broadly speaking, it does. I always before the appeal inspection, we always do what's called a strategic briefing to the HMIC. And we did that, myself and the Chief and members of the senior team, to our Chief HMI, who's Wendy Williams. And my kind of view on the inspections is that That briefing should provide a real sort of up-to-date current position, and HMRC shouldn't find anything that we don't already know about and talk about in that strategic briefing. And we were broadly pleased with the report that came out and the inspection results, and accepted a couple of the areas that they found that we really wanted to look at. But yes, to answer your question, it was as we were expecting to find. We did challenge them on a couple of points, to be fair. There were a couple of issues around neighbourhood policing that we felt needed greater clarification. And I think part of that was really due to COVID, the inability of the inspectors to actually come physically into force. They always do a lot of face-to-face interviews, drop-in sessions, focus groups, and their ability to do that was limited, and we felt that there were just 1 or 2 points that they hadn't quite grasped. So we went back, challenged, and actually the HMIC accepted what we told them. So yes, we were broadly pleased and in agreement with HMIC.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's always useful when they don't find anything in external. I agree with you. When external inspections find something that actually you didn't know about or you weren't expecting, that's when it's seriously worrying.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anyone else then on the recent Peel report?
Chair, if I might.
Yes, Kath.
Yeah, it's just generally around demand. Threaded through the paper, the HMIC comments on capability and then comments on demand, etc. And I know the force is doing a lot of work on diversion, etc. But actually part of what the HMIC have done and the Home Office in changing crime recording rules has kind of added to a paperwork system. And I just wondered if the Deputy had any comment on that.
Specifically on paperwork, Kath, or just more broadly, I think one of the points that, sorry, go on, I'll let you answer and then I'll come in with my point.
Yeah, specifically about the changing of the crime recording criteria. Other meetings, it's been clear that because of that, there's been more of a focus in writing off or decriming or identifying an outcome to be able to file paperwork rather than energies going into actual investigation.
Yeah, in terms of the CDI, the HMIC recognised, where we had requires improvement on 2 previous inspections, the fact that we were now rated as good. We have reached a point now where we are comfortable with our level of crime recording, but we do feel that on occasions it's not to the benefit of the victim. And I know we've had some conversations in other boards around why that might be the case. We don't focus a great deal of effort at all on trying to know crime events. We now record and investigate as opposed to investigate to record. I think one of the really interesting things in the HMIC report that I haven't seen in any other report is the comment that actually West Midlands Police is not resourced well enough to meet the demand that it faces, and that was quite an iconic statement from the HMIC, and it's not been said before. So in fact the Chief is speaking to our HMI, Wendy Williams, this morning, just to take that discussion a little bit further, because it is quite unique for them to say. But in terms of our crime data integrity, we feel that we are now in a strong position as a force and recording, the right amount of crimes, with little focus on the no crime afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So clearly this isn't the last we'll see of this, because the recommendations will go into an action plan. We'll be looking at progress against that. So we will be coming back to how the issues raised by the inspectorate are being dealt with as time goes on. But if that's all on the Peel report, then Harry, do you want to pick up the rest of your report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in the thematic inspections section, we've listed 2 upcoming inspections that we've received notification for around a thematic on online sexual abuse and sexual exploitation of children at the start of February, and then serious youth violence at the back end of February. We have actually had notice of at least three other inspections. I think in the first half of next year, one of which is the joint inspection following the death of Artabino Hughes. So there's a number of activities, inspection activities with the HMIC early in the new year, but there haven't been any other reports published with relation to kind of thematics over the last year because of Peel being a more integrated assessment. And then in terms of the final section, in terms of published reports, there is a couple of reports there in terms of the mental health piece, which is a joint inspection with criminal justice. That was something that I think we alluded to in our last update to the committee, but that report's now been published with recommendations. And as you said before, they feature in as part of our tracking process that all recommendations and areas for improvement go into.
Okay. So anything on those elements of the report from members?
No, thank you.
Chair, could I just ask?
Yes, Kathy.
So one of the recommendations is about investigating staff receiving training on vulnerability, but elsewhere in the reports, there's clearly a backlog on training or an issue in accessing training. There's just some understanding of how that's going to be delivered, given that you know, some of the normal training regime and courses aren't in place at the moment.
I think with the, I think Kathy, you're referring to 4.1, if I'm right in your description. So,
yeah.
Given that was a joint report, that kind of means that not all of the recommendations are necessarily specific just to our force or even to policing necessarily. You know, evidently on this one, it is more the case. And I think in terms of the detective training courses that it talks about, one of the I guess the kind of highlight points that HMIC picked out in the Peel inspection was around the Detective Academy and associated initiatives that we have put in place that will incorporate things like the Thrive assessments that we do habitually as an organisation. But very much so, I mean, as Veronica had already said, you know, there's I suppose a recovery plan, if you like, for training that's in place that will run over the next 3 to 6 months. And that's in line very much with the recommendations in Peel, particularly around improving our investigative practices. So, you know, we expect to see improvements in that area over the next 3 to 6 months.
Chair, I think it would be worth at some stage getting some insight into what that training recovery plan is, because it has such significant implications for some of these Peel recommendations, but also for a lot of other vulnerabilities that we're seeing develop.
Yes. Well, I mean, maybe because this isn't the first item either this morning in which we've been talking about training and the backlogs and how it's delivered. So perhaps I'll speak to Lynn after the meeting and look, just check, in fact, whether training is appearing anywhere on the internal audit schedule as a theme. But then how we might deal with it, because we don't want to be picking up each individual little. Not little, but each individual reference to training, but we do want to ensure that we're cited on it. Have you got any comments on that at the moment, Lynn? I can hear somebody else speaking, but I'm not quite sure who that was.
Sorry, Chair, I think it was myself.
Yes. Oh, was it? Yes, Vanessa.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair point, and I think I'm quite happy to take an action to speak to Veronica outside of this meeting in terms of the risk register, because we are here in West Midlands Police obviously because of COVID, but also because of the Commonwealth Games as well. We're very alive to the impact of training and the training that we need to provide to our our staff, because we have a very limited window. So we were kind of going to butt up against each other in terms of the code, and the fact that obviously with Omicron that we are now back into, very much restricting some of our face-to-face training. So I think it's probably something that we should consider for our risk register, and therefore would be very relevant for this board. So I'm happy to take that away and come back with something for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. I think that would be helpful. I'm very conscious, given my previous role in the health service, of the difficulties of providing appropriate training and ensuring everybody gets to it when the day job constantly pulls people in other directions. And online is not always the answer, because online training can become something of a tick box exercise and doesn't help people to improve. So if it's looked at in the round, that I think would be helpful for us. Okay, is there anyone on any other point?
No, thank you.
No. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Harry, for that update and stepping in for Rachel today.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 7, which is the Anti-Fraud, Bribery and Corruption Annual Effectiveness Review, which is, of course, not a review into our effectiveness as in bribery and corruption, but anti-bribery, anti-corruption. Mark, are you leading on this, or is Sam picking this up from the outset?
Chair, I'll introduce it and talk about internal audits work. If
you.
that's okay, then Sam can carry on with the rest of the report. So this is an annual report. Sorry to state the obvious. It talks about internal audits work over the last 12 months in terms of anti-fraud and corruption. Obviously, as a committee, one of your key roles is to monitor the policies related to fraud and corruption, and as you would expect, both the PCC and the Chief Constable have got a policy of zero tolerance in this area. So in terms of internal audits work, as a committee, you've been updated in terms of the work of internal audit, in terms of the areas of concern through the year. Although we haven't done specific audits on fraud and corruption, obviously it touches a number of areas in terms of internal audits work, particularly around those areas that obviously relate to payments of the organisation, things like accounts payable, commissioning within the OPCC and payroll. So there's been a number of recommendations around those reports, and those are being actioned. You're obviously aware that through the internal audit process as well, you're made through reports of internal audit those areas that have got limited or minimal assurance. During the pandemic, some areas of control were paused temporarily. Internal audit has advised on those controls and on what should be put in place in terms of compensating controls. You'll be aware of the National Fraud Initiative that the report refers to, and the data matching exercise that takes place with central government and policing bodies and other organisations in the public sector. The report mentions that in total there was overpayments through that exercise identified of 342,000. Some of them related to pensions mortality screening exercise, which the pension service within West Midlands Police undertake. There's still some of those outstanding, I believe around £12,000, and also the vast majority of that 342,000 related to creditor overpayments, and 29,000 of the 281,000 is still being recovered. The pensions mortality screening exercise is obviously a difficult and sensitive area exercise to undertake. A lot of the overpayments were relating to timings of when obviously somebody unfortunately dies and the pension service finds out about it, and sometimes unfortunately due to the nature of the payments, payments can carry on for some time, but there is being controls being put in place and improvements being put in place in the pension service to try and mitigate that as much as possible. And the creditor payments is, from my understanding, obviously those overpayments related to some sort of overpayments report that wasn't wasn't particularly picking up overpayments at the time, but that has been corrected. So this is where sort of duplicate payments arise. So that's all I wanted to say really on the introductory part of the report. I'm sure Sam will come in and talk through the rest of it, unless you've got any questions on the part I've talked through.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So, Chief Superintendent Ridding, Sam, do you want to come in now?
Chair, good morning everyone. So in relation to the professional standards update, so the report probably speaks for itself and just highlights the conduct and complaint matters relating to theft and fraud and other similar matters that would sit in this area of business. The data period we've looked at is 12-month period, November of 2020 until November of this year. And we have tried in the last 12 months to use the learning from previous years about using keywords in our data, which enables us to search more efficiently. And I'm confident that that is improving. And we have 9 cases to report in this 12-month period. And as can be seen in Appendix A, 5 of those have already been dealt with as no further action. A number of those relate to anonymous reporting, which I'm sure you can understand makes it difficult from the beginning to try and corroborate that information, and where we can't, clearly there's not a great deal more we can do with those. 4 of the cases are still ongoing and under investigation, and 1 of those is due to go to a misconduct hearing for a staff member shortly. That won't be this year, it was hoped it would be, but there has been some further information and that is now delaying things slightly. Business interests haven't been subject to this report, but as you can see, there have been 6 reports about that. And in the main, business interest is dealt with in terms of learning and making sure staff understand their roles and responsibilities in relation to business interests at the same time as performing their role in the organisation. It isn't a significant issue for us as a professional standards department in West Midlands Police, and that is not out of sync with the national picture. In terms of corruption for West Midlands Police and nationally, 2 matters are of significant interest, which are abuse of position for a sexual purpose and disclosure of information. Notwithstanding, we deal with all of the information that comes in about the matters relating to fraud and theft and corruption, but they are not a high priority for us as they do not feature highly in our reporting. We do a considerable amount of work, not just in this area of business, but around prevention and intervention. Inputs are detailed to new recruits and staff members, and wherever possible, our inputs to members of staff are completed by members of the department to ensure that there can be a 2-way interactive conversation which allows for questions and increased understanding. You may have seen that we publish from Professional Standards a dilemma of the month, and that uses cases that have concluded, obviously anonymised or names changed, and that allows for better understanding. The dilemma is put on the intranet. What would you do in these circumstances? People give answers and the real life answer is given a number of weeks later. In August of this year, that was focused on business interests and 3 matters were there. And there is some interesting conversation, but I'm absolutely sure that that enables staff to understand by exploring the answers and then the answer being provided. In the performance panel this year in November, I presented around vetting and also reminded our senior leaders to make sure their teams use the yearly integrity health check. So whilst conducting those performance reviews under the West Midlands Police conversations, that they're also using the integrity health check. And that covers off matters of vulnerability, which can include financial matters, obviously personal welfare and notifiable associations, enabling sometimes what people believe to be a tricky conversation to happen as a result of that WMP conversation. And we have also, during the last 3 months, republicised the confidential reporting line. We haven't, since I started in September, had matters relating to this area of business reported, but that line is being used on an increasing basis further matters. And then where there are areas of good practice that we recognise, for example, within Force CID, with line managers using the data, the monthly overtime data, to talk to their staff, understanding who is using the most, who is earning the most overtime, and understanding why that might be, and is that all above board? And in the main, it absolutely is. Making sure that our prevention and intervention team is sharing that good practice against other areas of business when we do get the anonymous reporting that potentially we can't do anything with it. And obviously there are a number of policies that we're responsible for that are in the process of being reviewed, which includes business interests, gift and hospitality, and the notifiable association policy is out for consultation at the moment, I believe.
Okay, thank you very much. That's comprehensive. Okay, are there members with questions or comments?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Kath? Has your heating gone off?
It has, yeah. Can you tell? It suddenly went kaput. I'll have a look at that in a minute. So regarding Appendix A, which is the table of allegations, there's a number on there which are associated to abuse of overtime, and then an indication of no further action. Does that mean that there was no action required because the investigation showed that that there was no case to answer, or was it that there's no action taken because it couldn't be substantiated? So that's the first question. And then specifically about the allegation of an inspector claiming overtime payments. Aren't inspectors salaried, so there shouldn't be any need for overtime payments? And if they did try and claim, would the system allow them to do that?
Thanks, Kath. So in relation to the first question, so it is a mixture of both. Either the information has been explored and unsubstantiated, or actually, as the information is anonymous, there isn't enough information for us to do any further exploration into those matters. And then in relation to the inspector, my understanding was it was around the not overtime, which you're absolutely right, inspectors aren't entitled to overtime, but it was around how they were trying to use their time worked over and above their hours. So it was overtime in the term of time owing, for want of a better expression.
Okay. And then just moving on to the staff member who's provided property to another person. I'm sure the chair will come in on this, but it's just a bit of an understanding of what the circumstances were of that and what was the intention there.
So that matter's still ongoing to discipline hearing. So I think it would be a precaution not to talk in too much detail. It has been suggested to me that this involves the sale of police uniform, and what I can say is categorically that it does not involve the sale of police uniform, and it is as described. It is use of the purchasing system to purchase goods that individual was not entitled to do so. But if that's acceptable, Chair, if I trip into any more, I may prejudice anything that might take place.
That's helpful. The way that it was worded immediately made me think of an internal audit report, which caused us some concern 3 or 4 years ago. But if it's ongoing, understandably, we shouldn't be discussing it further here. Yes. And an assurance outside the meeting that that the two could not be related would be very helpful.
Okay, and as soon as it's concluded, I can make sure that you have the relevant information.
Okay, thank you.
Hearing.
Thank you.
Thank
Chair,
you. Yes, Richard.
Richard, can I just on that point about I understand Sam's points about not getting into the detail of the case, but on the point about the purchasing system, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam. I think you said they were purchasing things potentially that they shouldn't be purchasing. It's probably a question to Lynn or Mark. In terms of the controls within the purchasing system, are there not things embedded within there that kind of provide access or no access depending on their access rights, that mean their powers to purchase things are proportionate to their role or function.
Yeah, I'll come in there, Richard, if you can hear me. I'm having a few technical difficulties at the moment, so just bear with me a little bit. As you say, that there are inbuilt controls in the system in terms of segregation of duties between ordering and invoicing. In terms of levels of authorisation, some of the orders do need to be referred to procure to pay to get approval on if they're above contract standing orders limits. I'm not aware of the detail of this specific case to comment on whether or not that's breached those controls, but there are definitely inbuilt controls within the system that should prevent some elements of procurement. So you are right there, but I don't know the detail on this to know whether anything's been breached.
Okay, no, thank you. I mean, I guess the sort of thing, and you may not be in a position to know at this point, but there might be certain categories of expenditure, sort of merchant categories, that, you know, if your role is a staff function, you can't purchase certain types of things, regardless of the kind of level of expenditure you can kind of expend.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not aware of that
Yeah,
type of sorry, I'm not aware of that type of limitations within the system. I think it's just on value, but we can look into that and just double check, because I might not be 100% accurate there, but we'll look into that and I can report back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Richard, it's Neil, if I can just help.
Yes, Neil.
I guess the simple answer is no, we can't do that by subjective coding.
Okay.
But individuals would obviously have access to place orders on their home cost centre within the budgetary constraints, as Lynn has said, in terms of either the budget available, but also the level of amount that individual can order up to. That governance does exist within our NUM system, which is the uniform ordering system. So theoretically, all of those items are linked to the individual role. So a police officer in a certain role can only have access to the equipment and uniform that they would require to carry out that duty. And then there is a set allowance per year of number and quantity of those items they could have. But in terms of the purchase ordering system, that's limited by value rather than type of spend.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
It is. Okay, thank you. So is there anything else on this report from anyone? No. Okay, thank you very much then to Sam for her input on that. We will move on to item 8, the corporate governance framework. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So committee receives an annual report on the review of annual governance, which is the scheme of governance between the Commissioner and the Chief Constable in terms of how they operate on a day-to-day basis. This includes roles and responsibilities, things like schemes of delegations, financial regulations and standing orders, which regulates how we procure and purchase things. So the role of the committee is to review the framework. And as the report sets out, this has been through quite a detailed officer review through members of the sort of senior members within the force and senior members within the OPCC. So in terms of changes from last year's to this year's, there has not really been any fundamental changes. As usual, we've updated it in terms of references of people's roles and responsibilities in terms of job titles. But what we've done this year is made it very clear and sort of emphasised the £1 million threshold that requires a PCC decision, and made it clear as well that this includes all funds passing through the Chief Constable and the PCC, irrespective of how they're funded. So it could be instances where something's grant funded, it could be something that's funded through general police resources, just to make sure that it's clear to people when they're using the standing orders on a day-to-day basis that the rules that apply. So following on from the meeting today, the revised scheme will be subject to a PCC decision. The report then talks about the areas that were brought to attention through the annual governance statements back in the summer, and details the actions that have been taking place to date this year. Some of them are generic actions, and some of them are specific. I think it makes reference to the missing report that internal audit did, and how sort of progress that's been achieved in terms of the follow-up audits. Then the report refers to the government's review of police and crime commissioners and the roles of police and crime commissioners. So when we know the outcome of that review in its entirety, that might have governance impacts. It might mean that we need to change the scheme as well. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from members?
Not from me, Chair, thank you.
No. One of the themes that we've been exploring has been this one of shared learning, and I was interested to note, and I've got the page, but where it sits in the thing, but there's a section developing the capability of the entity's leadership and other individuals, which actually does then pick that up, ensuring personal, organisational, system-wide development through shared learning. And that might be something we want to come back on and just explore in practice what that means and how it's happening, because I think we've seen a good number of examples of one part of the organisation learning from something that's happened and then a similar mistake or error occurring somewhere else. So I think that is something I'd want us to pick up in the future. But it's good to see it there.
Yeah, Chair, that's something definitely we can look into and help you in that area.
Yes, yeah, good. Okay, does anybody else want to come in on this?
No, thank you, Chair.
No, okay, thank you very much. So we will note that, and we will move on to item 9, which will also be led by Mark, which is the forthcoming appointment of external auditors and the national arrangements for that. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is really to bring to committee the update in terms of where we are in terms of procuring external audit services from a national perspective. You'll probably be aware that we currently procure Grant Thornton through an organisation called Public Sector Audit Appointments that was formed a number of years ago to sort of offer a collaborative approach to procuring external audit services for a number of public sector organisations, including local government and policing. And this is to share with committee the arrangement that we're being asked to sign up to for the 5-year period starting 23-24. The recommendation from the PCC's office and the Chief Constable's office is to actually sign up to the PSA arrangement. I think we have to do that from a logistical point of view by March next year. And you'll have seen in the papers the arrangements that the benefits the arrangements hopefully will bring. As you know, the external audit market has been particularly turbulent over recent years, and there has been issues around sort of quality. You'll be aware that the current arrangement delivered quite a significant saving at the start. I think probably about 30% on fees, which obviously we took advantage of. And obviously the capability of external audit, the skills and skills they possess is something that's been under the spotlight. So clearly through the contracting arrangement that'll happen through this arrangement, you'd expect that to be picked up. And I suspect that fees will go up as well from the current level. I think there's not many policing organisations that procure external audit outside the PSA arrangement. I'm aware of only one. It would be quite a sort of administrative burden on us, obviously the procurement side of it, but I understand we'd have to have our own local audit board as well, I think, to actually to coordinate that procurement. So the recommendation is from us to audit committees to actually subscribe to it. And we're just bringing it here really for audit committee's view, and if you've got any points on that.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Well, the audit committee, in the last round, the audit committee did support the view that joining the joint action would be helpful. I suppose the one question I would raise, having then been to and virtually been to a couple of national meetings for as it were clients of PCSA, is that in a sense it feels as though the last exercise was almost too successful in driving the cost down, and a number of the firms that secured contracts had done so on the basis of assumptions they'd made about, to be frank, cheaper labour coming in from elsewhere, quite often from Australia and places like that, and that actually, given the pandemic and given other circumstances, actually there were not the number of younger accountants coming in, so they were really struggling to be staffed, and a number of public sector organisations, principally I have to say smaller district councils, were really struggling with the not getting the service that they felt they'd paid for, and very, very late audits. Now, it didn't affect us in the same way, but are we satisfied that PSAA can do the right level of due diligence on the firms who are bidding to be sure that that we don't end up with as it were, too low a bid and somebody bidding on the basis of getting the business, but not actually having the capacity to deliver what we need?
Yeah, from what I'm seeing, Chair, I think we're fairly confident that PSA has learnt a lot itself from the exercise, what took place over recent years. We've focused on obviously the cost element to it, but there's also been lots of developments in the audit profession as well around sort of quality and obviously corporate failure, particularly on the private sector side. I think that's something obviously that's been another issue why external audit has struggled. So I don't think it's just about cost, but I think from what I've seen from PSA and the assurances we've had, we're fairly confident that they have learned, and that will be factored into the evaluation of contract and in evaluation of contracts when they do actually go through a bidding round. But I think it is a very good point. And I don't really remember when we went to very early workshops when the PSSA contracts had just started. It was a common theme about quality, how quality is going to be measured.
Yes.
So that was picked up quite early on through clients, which was expressed as a concern.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else want to come in?
Just a quick one from me, please, if I may, Chair. Thank you. Mark, are you able to kind of give us a sense? I know in the private sector that some companies are expected to kind of rotate firms of external auditors. I think from memory it's kind of every 5 to 7 years, just to make sure that kind of the relationship didn't get too cozy or whatever. Is there a similar expectation or requirement on public sector organisations? I'm just trying to get a feel for how long we've had the relationship with Grant Thornton and how long it might be, and whether there's an expectation that we would rotate and change our auditors at some point.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. I'm not absolutely definite. Can't provide a definite answer. I'm aware there is a rotation system, particularly within the firms themselves. If you can remember, we've had changing audit lead through rotation within the firm itself, and that's obviously to as you described, to make sure there's an independence still in terms of that relationship. But I'm not 100% sure the rotation system, which I will come back to you on. I'm aware of it, but I'm not sure the specifics of it.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, so Richard and Kath, are you happy that the committee approve the process that the Chief Constable and the Commissioner's Office are recommending, and that we use the PSAA action for procurement?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Chair, I am.
Okay, thank you. So that we'll pass that on as our advice, that we do act in cooperation with other bodies. Thank you, Mark. Okay, Lynn, internal audit update. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just my usual update. We've had 4 audits finalised since the previous meeting, and we've got 6 in draft, which are awaiting management comments. One of those drafts we actually finalised yesterday, and we've issued a further draft actually since the report was issued to you. In terms of audit recommendations, our works followed up on 37 audits during the year, and we're showing an 81% implementation rate against the recommendations from those audits at the moment. But what members will probably note is that the list at Appendix 4 is getting smaller, which shows a number of the significant recommendations are now starting to move, and I think we're at the lowest level probably since I started 4 or 5 years ago. So that's showing, you know, a positive movement, and that some significant controls have started to be addressed. There was some slowdown during the pandemic, but you know, we're starting to see some progress there now, which is really good. We will continue to follow up on those until they reach their conclusion or are transferred to management to bring to a conclusion. In terms of the internal auditor's performance, we can see that we're at 50% of the audit plan, which is roughly where we normally are this time of year. We were at the same position last year and we're slightly above where we were in 2019. And based on the forecasts I've done, we are on target to achieve the plan, all being well. But what we did do is take the opportunity to revise the plan at mid-year point, partly because there was a lot of movement in the risk register of the force, with it being now more dynamic. There is going to be some movement throughout the year on the risk profile. So I met with DCC Jardine and we talked about the risks that are closed, which resulted in a couple of audits being taken out of the plan and one being put back in, which was on Commonwealth Games resources, which we've actually had to commence due to the time urgency of the Commonwealth Games obviously being in the summer of next year, and we wanted that assurance piece doing quite quickly. So I did liaise with the chair outside of this meeting, and I'm reporting it really for endorsement from other members today. I think last meeting I gave you an update also on the external assessment that internal audit have to go through every 5 years. There's been a little bit of movement on that now, in that we've had quotations which have been analysed. We've selected a provider and I'm currently in consultation with that provider to confirm dates, but it's looking like the assessment will take place towards the end of June. But once we know, I'll obviously confirm that with members, and I'm sure that you will be contacted by the assessor to have some input into that exercise. Appendix 1 of the report is where we summarise the limited and minimal opinions that have been given. There was just 2 limited this time, so we've got management of suspects and victim satisfaction. I'm not going to go into the detail of these, but what members will probably identify from both of these audits is similarities in terms of record keeping in Connect. As you're aware, Connect was implemented in April, and both of the audits have identified some issues with how things are being recorded in Connect, or where we couldn't find things recorded in Connect. It's largely a legacy issue from the old system where issues were reported in an inquiry log, and within Connect there's new areas of the system where items such as victims' contact need to be recorded. So there is some sort of teething issues in terms of people not necessarily following on from the old legacy system and not necessarily putting it in the right place. But we've raised that as a concern because obviously if management reports are produced from the system, it might not necessarily show the correct information. But what we did find is it wasn't always a case of missing information. It was about missing information being reported in the wrong place. But the force are being quite proactive in trying to address that. There's exercises going on at the moment across Force CID and PPU called Connecting the Dots, which is a number of challenge exercises trying to nudge people towards the guidance to correct that behaviour. And there's going to be more of those exercises from what I've heard going on in the future. So hopefully That will help address some of those issues going forward. What you'll also identify is we're still waiting for some of the reports to be built in Connect as well. So in the interim, management will be relying on enhancing the DIP sampling to address some of the weaknesses that we've actually identified, and that is being taken forward in both PPU and for CID, which both of these audits actually covered. So on the call today, we've got Carmilla, who did the audit of management of suspects, and we've got Gemma, who did the audit of victim satisfaction, and they're happy to answer any questions on those specific audits. But generally, yes, that's all I wanted to report, and happy to answer any questions members might have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So should we start by seeing if there are any questions on either of those two limited audit findings? Management of suspects first. Did anybody want to raise any questions?
Yeah, yes, Chair.
Kath?
One of the issues appears to be supervisory reviews, which are really important when you're looking at issues of decision making regarding suspects and also bail. And we're back to what's the demand on officers. So really this is about how will the force find or help supervisors find time to do these reviews.
Okay, it's not really a question for Carmilla. It's more a question for Vanessa.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Kath. I mean, the demand, is quite extraordinary. I'm sorry, we've just been plunged into darkness here. The demand is quite extraordinary on supervisors, and you're quite right. It is an important function, but I think we are currently going through an investigations review process. We've got a formal project stood up looking at that. We are got new supervisors in our both FCID and PPU teams, new senior leadership teams, and I think what we're looking at now is the review, the change program that's ongoing, the investigations process, and how we can support and what we need to write on what these reviews need to look like. Because I think, if you look at them at the nth degree and the demand to write on every single one, that's just not achievable. How can we put in a risk-based decisions and supervisor input? So it's all being led by Claire Bell, our ACC here for crime, and having a thorough review of all our investigation process, because we do recognise where that vulnerability is and we need to address it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm sorry if you heard some noises off just a moment ago. That was my husband offering me coffee, but he did it in a very noisy way. Anyone else wanted to come in?
No, thank you.
Okay, so thank you. It's very clearly written, Camilla, and we all understood it. Thank you. Anyone wanting to raise anything then on the second of those two reports?
Yes, please.
Victims, yes.
Just to say that this is not the only report that the audit team have done around victims' code and victim satisfaction, and I think their kind of integrity in reporting still comes up with the same issues, which really is about training and officers understanding their responsibilities around the victims' code. And it's really disappointing to see that victim personal statements are highlighted again, either in not being offered or where they have been taken. They've kind of disappeared into the system and probably never made it into the court process, which is where they need to be. So I thank the audit team for highlighting these issues again. And again, Vanessa, if you could give us some reassurance about how that's all going to be dealt with.
Yeah, and Kath, I am equally frustrated by this. This seems to be, in all my 7.5 years of policing, an issue that has never been resolved. But I am absolutely committed, for the importance of victims and them having their voice in court processes through a victim impact statement. And I just rehearsed what I previously said around the investigations review. We've looked at our placement of our student officers because we have put quite a lot of student officers into some of our investigation teams, and we've just made some decisions as part of the exec team to change those placements so that officers have longer on some of their rotations as student officers, because I think what we felt was they were going into teams for quite a short period of time in order to fulfil every rotation, and we've made some decisions to change that so they have longer in some areas, particularly in investigations, so that we can upskill them in a better way, in a more consistent way than sort of giving them almost a bit of a sort of quick look at investigations before moving them on to the next rotation. We've made some very, what I think are pragmatic views around our student officers. There is a huge opportunity though with those student officers and their training. I've talked about some of the difficulties of training, both with COVID and the impending Commonwealth Games, but we're absolutely committed to giving people the best skills. It's not acceptable. I agree that some of these impact statements are not getting to where they need to be, or even not being taken. And it will form part of the investigations review as well, in order that we can deliver the service that we all aspire to for our communities.
Okay, so thank you for that. I mean, I think it's clearly going to be important that we're looking at how well the management actions, because there's quite an impressive list of management actions on both of these that have been agreed. So it's important that we're monitoring that those actually happen, because they'll go a long way, I think, to putting right what was not right. So thank you for that. Anyone else?
No, thank you.
No, okay, thanks. So thanks for the update, Lynn, and I'm pleased that that we've managed to appoint someone for the external assessment, and that'll, as you say, take place in the middle of next year. Okay, if there's nothing else on that, item 11 is the external audit. We have a brief report from Grant Thornton. We don't have anybody from Grant Thornton in attendance. Is there, which is disappointing, because it's not because we've changed the date. Did anyone have any points they wanted to raise that we can forward on to our external auditors?
Not
No.
for me. No, thank you.
No. Okay. Item 12 then is the Joint Audit Committee work programme. I think it might be helpful, Lynn, if in March we've got the risk management progress update. If we actually add to that to include discussion on the risk appetite, I think that will give us a jog to ensure that actually it's on our agenda, that it gets onto our agenda, and that we are actually picking up that challenge that was posed to us in our last training session. If we can do that.
Yeah, that's fine, Sue. I'll add it on.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anything else? Okay. So we do have one item to discuss in private. So I'm going to conclude the public meeting. I'm going to ask everybody to leave it. We've got a separate invite for the private meeting, which I'm going to suggest we take 15 minutes as a comfort break, and that the private meeting commence at 11:15. Can I thank everybody for their input today? I think the shorter meeting time bears witness to the fact that half our members are not here. We might well have had more questions if we'd had full attendance. But thank you everyone for your input, for your answers. And I wish everyone who won't be in the private meeting a happy Christmas. And let's hope that the new year doesn't begin with a lockdown, but who knows? We will see where we are in March, whether we're meeting in public or in private. Online or in person was what I was trying to say, and we'll have to bear in mind that clearly with our training session in January as well. So thank you all. We'll resume in 15 minutes for one private item. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
This live meeting